Good morning, friends. So now you have got the material which I was yesterday talking about. So you will be seeing this material. There is those topics which I was mentioning, and because yesterday we were talking about the growth pole theory. So you'll be finding it is there on page number 8. So most of the things which we talked about, it is written a little bit more comprehensively than what we have written in the class. In the class, we have organized it better. Okay, so we'll continue with what we were doing. So we were talking about the growth pole theory, and we had studied the theory, and we had to now discuss the critique and application of the theory. So anyone, if you have any problem, you can ask me now. पेरूज आइडिया, यार देखो पेरू सिंपली क्या कह रहा है, अपने दिमाग से निकाल दो ज्योग्राफी को, ठीक है. कैन वी से सपोज वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट अगेन द सेम थिंग, देयर इज इंडिया, ठीक है, एंड कैन आई से देयर इज इंडियन इकोनॉमी. अब इंडिया के टर्म्स में देखूं तो कैन आई से कि बहुत सारे देयर आर स्टेट्स which it is made up of. In these states there are several cities and rural places which it is made up of. So this is what? This is geographical space. If I talk about Indian economy, can I say Indian economy is made up of three things? Primary sector, secondary sector, and the tertiary sector. ठीक है. So Peru is not concerned about this because he believes कि इसके बारे में already बहुत बात हो चुकी है. So even before him, because you know we have seen, and some of you were not there, so you'll see later that central place theory which we are studying in geography, actually it was an economic theory. It was made in economics. So even within economics there is a branch of economics which is referred to as spatial economics. So actually it was formulated in spatial economics. So he was already very aware that there is already a central place theory which is talking about the geographical aspect, the spatial aspect of the same phenomena, of the places where the growth is taking place. But what was the case of the central place theory? Central place theory does not explain why the growth occurs, why certain places become central places. And he was more concerned about explaining this why aspect, the economic aspect of the phenomenon. And thus he says, he takes the case of Indian economy or economic space. And in this economic space, जैसे कि हम देख सकते हैं कि इंडियन इकोनॉमी में all these are there. प्राइम सेकेंडरी सेक्टर को भी हम डिवाइड कर सकते हैं, बेसिक इंडस्ट्रीज एंड कंज्यूमर गुड्स इंडस्ट्रीज. फॉर एग्जांपल आज की डेट में अगर हम देखें फॉर एग्जांपल, तो कैन आई से कि वन इंडस्ट्री और वन इंडस्ट्रियल सेगमेंट which is growing fast in India, it is this manufacturing segment which is growing fast. ठीक है, तो अब मैं क्या कह रहा हूं, पेरू क्या बोल रहा है कि दिस इज द होल। ठीक है, कंज्यूमर गुड्स में भी बहुत सारे इंडस्ट्रीज हो सकते हैं फॉर एग्जांपल, तो जैसे कि हमने देखा वन इज ऑटोमोबाइल। ठीक है, so now Peru is saying what, that this is essentially what, this is the growth pole. Why this is a growth pole? Because in this sector there is location of what, there is location of propulsive firms. Propulsive firms belong to it. Like India में देखें तो do we have several even Indian automobile manufacturing firms? If you talk about Tata for example, Mahindra is an example, Hero is an example, Maruti is an example. So there are several Indian, if you talk about firms. So वो जो Indian firms हैं, they are basically what? They are propulsive firms. What was the characteristic of propulsive firms जो हमने देखा था? They are large industries, ठीक है, which have huge capacity of investment. ठीक है, and they are investing in what? They are investing in research and development. And through that investment, they are leading to technological breakthroughs. These technological breakthroughs are causing spurts in the growth momentum. ठीक है, तो because of these propulsive firms being located here in this sector, what happens to this sector? This sector becomes the leading industry. ठीक है, and this leading industry for Peru is what? This is essentially the growth pole. ठीक है, इस लीडिंग इंडस्ट्री की और खासियत क्या है? देयर इज फॉरवर्ड एंड बैकवर्ड लिंकेजेस एसोसिएटेड विथ इट. सो ऑटोमोबाइल के साथ भी देयर इज फॉरवर्ड एंड बैकवर्ड लिंकेजेस विच आर एसोसिएटेड विथ इट. लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल, इसका बैकवर्ड लिंकेज किसके साथ है? कैन आई से आयरन एंड स्टील, रबर, प्लास्टिक, various type of, if you talk about industries are associated with it, so that is the raw material for automobile industries. ठीक है, so if automobile growth is taking place, will the growth of these industries also simultaneously occur? ठीक है, and you can very clearly understand, if there is automobile taking place, इसका forward linkages भी हैं, there is backward linkage, there is also a forward linkage of the automobile industry. So if there is more production of automobile in India, does it means that in India there will be mobility which will increase? There will be greater mobility taking place, and does this mobility affect various other industrial segments? ठीक है, there will be definitely, like for example, transportation sector industries, will they grow? Definitely there will be growth taking place. So there is a forward linkage also associated. ठीक है, so because there is growth taking place in this growth pool, or propulsive growth taking place in this growth pool, now this growth also spirals to the other sectors of the economy. ठीक है, which is basically what? It is the spillover effects which will be felt. यही बोल रहा है पेरू. अब सीधी सी बात है कि जो हमने नाम लिए ये प्रोपल्सिव फर्म्स के, लाइक हमने बोला महिंद्रा एंड महिंद्रा, टाटा एटसेट्रा, वुडविल सेज दैट बिकॉज दीज प्रोपल्सिव फर्म्स, ये कहीं पर ज्योग्राफी में क्या होगा? दे विल बी लोकेटेड समवेयर. ठीक है, लाइक महिंद्रा एंड महिंद्रा को देखें तो महिंद्रा एंड महिंद्रा इज लोकेटेड इन पुणे. ठीक है, it is located at several other places. Pune is one main center of it. Similarly, if you talk about Tata, you can understand where it is located. Jamshedpur, it is located. So does it means that Pune will also experience that kind of growth because this firm is growing? So because of the growth of that firm, even that place where it is located, that will also grow. So now in geographical sense, what will happen? This Pune will become what? It will become growth pole or growth center. I hope it is understood now. Okay. So this is the difference between the ideas of Peru and Vaudeville. ठीक है. So Peru and Vaudeville के बीच में ये एक difference है. Other, if you talk about, some have students question me, what is difference between growth pole and growth center? इन दोनों में क्या difference है? ठीक है. So the answer lies कि there is no concrete answer for this. What is difference between growth pole and growth center? Growth pole and growth centers are words which are used as a synonym very commonly. Okay. However, some scholars have discussed the difference. One category of scholars believe that these two terms, growth pole and growth centers, should be reserved exclusively. So growth pole should be reserved exclusively for the idea presented by Peru. The term growth center should be reserved for the idea presented by Vaudeville, so that the distinction can be made clear. So when you are talking using the word growth pole, that means you are talking in more economic sense. When you are using the word growth center, you are talking in a more geographical sense. Okay, so this is one conception. There are other scholars who disagree, who say that these growth pole and growth centers, they should be seen as growth foci which are present in hierarchy. ठीक है. So hierarchically देखें तो जो सबसे बड़े सेंटर्स होंगे, अभी हम देखेंगे आरपी मिश्रा का मॉडल. तो द लार्जेस्ट सेंटर्स, they are referred to as growth poles. Below them there is growth center. Below them there is growth point. Then there is service center. And then there is the central village. So some others, they disagree with this idea that growth pole is a term which should be associated with Peru and growth center with Vaudeville. They say that it is better to see them as growth foci which are hierarchical in nature. I hope it is clear now. और किसी को कुछ पूछना है? लीडिंग प्रोपल्सिव फॉर्म मैंने वर्ड ही नहीं यूज किया. लीडिंग प्रोपल्सिव इंडस्ट्री यहां पे बताया. तो लीडिंग प्रोपल्सिव इंडस्ट्री क्या है? इट इज दैट सेक्टर, दैट इंडस्ट्री जिसमें ग्रोथ हो रही है. ठीक है. और प्रोपल्सिव फर्म्स क्या हो गई? महिंद्रा एंड महिंद्रा, टाटा, दीज आर इंडिविजुअल फर्म्स. जो है वो फर्म्स हैं, दे आर द प्रोपल्सिव फर्म्स. लीडिंग इंडस्ट्री इज दैट सेक्टर to which they belong, to the industry to which they belong. ठीक है. Yes. Agglomeration. Multiplier effect is what? Multiplier effect is this forward and backward link. Okay. So it is this forward and backward linkage. So suppose if growth is taking place in one sector, like for example, take the example of China. China started to do what? China started to develop its manufacturing. And if you talk about its manufacturing, it resorted to an export-based model of development. Okay? So you might be aware, China, because of that, it didn't allow the market forces to dictate its currency value. China itself dictated its currency value. So it kept the currency value to be little bit lower so that there can be more exports. So they followed an export-based model of development, and primarily they focused upon manufacturing. So when there is high growth of manufacturing taking place, does it means that it will have a multiplier effect on the other sectors of the economy? ठीक है, that is what is the multiplier effect. और भी कुछ पूछना है किसी को? ओके, आगे बढ़ते हैं अब. So let us talk about the criticism of the growth pole theory. Criticism of the growth pole theory. इसमें लिखो, while the growth pole theory has been influential, while the growth pole theory has been influential in regional development planning, it has faced criticism on several grounds. It has faced criticism on several grounds. ठीक है. सो अब मुझे क्रिटिसिजम्स को सोचना है और मुझे एक ऐसा फ्रेमवर्क बनाना है so that I am able to recall it in the examination. ठीक है, मुझे मेमोराइज हो जाए. तो सबसे बेस्ट तरीका क्या है? What is the best way to do so? Can I say I let my ideas flow according to the theoretical premises? थ्योरी के हिसाब से अगर मैं अपने आइडियाज को फ्लो करने दूं. ठीक है, तो हमने क्या देखा है थ्योरी में? देयर वाज, इफ यू टॉक अबाउट, 3 मेन आइडियाज. वन वाज दैट ऑफ द लीडिंग इंडस्ट्री एंड propulsive firms. Then if you talk about, there is polarization and agglomeration taking place, and then there is the phenomena of the spillover effects. ठीक है, ट्रिकल डाउन और स्पिल ओवर दोनों बोलते हैं उसको, स्पिल ओवर इफेक्ट्स. ठीक है. सो इफ यू टॉक अबाउट, कैन आई से कि मैं इसी तरह से अपने आइडिया को अगर फ्लो करने दूंगा तो दैट विल बी एक्चुअली मच बेटर. तो सबसे पहले बात करते हैं, इसमें लिखो, द थ्योरी प्लेसेस स्ट्रॉन्ग फोकस ऑन इंडस्ट्रियल ग्रोथ. Industrial growth as a primary driver of regional development. Full stop. However, in many regions, especially in developing countries, agriculture or the service sector, may be more significant for local economy. Full stop. A one size a one size fits all approach, same criticism it is, one size fits all approach that prioritizes industrialization can neglect the potential of other sectors. Neglect the potential of the other sectors. ठीक है. So again, this is the phenomena of which it talks about. So सबसे पहले उसने ये बात बोली. दूसरा, the theory is talking about the phenomena of agglomeration benefits. But if you talk about agglomeration benefits, it is not very clearly explained how these agglomeration benefits, if you talk about, they are accrued. ठीक है. There are many other ways. उसने बता दिया कि ये 3 तरह के agglomeration benefits होते हैं, but उसका exemplification it has not done properly. So इसको लिखो, the theory does not adequately address the role of externalities and agglomeration. Full stop. Agglomeration economies are critical for understanding how growth is concentrated. Full stop. However, growth pole theory often fails to provide clear guidelines on how these externalities are generated and sustained. How these externalities are generated and sustained. ठीक है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल अगर हम देखें, टेक द केस ऑफ मुंबई. मुंबई इज अ ग्रोथ पोल, and in Mumbai there is agglomeration economies at work. There are several industries which have agglomerated. ठीक है. But the question is, when there is agglomeration, there can also be diseconomies of agglomeration which can be generated. ठीक है. So how a growth pole is able to manage or sustain those externalities or those economies, those advantages over a period of time. Again, many things, if you talk about, they are just on more superficial and not very clearly explained in the growth pole theory. The details are, what we are trying to say is, the details are missing. ठीक है. So that is another important criticism. एक criticism है, मैं थोड़ा सा इसको पहले लिखाना चाहता हूँ, because वो sequence में याद करने में थोड़ा easy होगा, तो इसको पहले 1B करके लिख लेते हैं इसको. This criticism. या चलो छोड़ो, इसको 1B मत करो, इसको 3 करो, कोई बात नहीं, नो प्रॉब्लम. तो इसमें लिखो, द थ्योरी ऑफन डिसरिगार्ड्स The theory often disregards the role of negentropy. Disregards the role of negentropy. इसमें लिखना चाहते हो तो लिख लो ब्रैकेट में, a term used to describe disorder, a term used to describe disorder in developing economies. In developing economies. Full stop. At early stages of development, the growth pools may exacerbate or increase uneven development, comma, as large cities grow disproportionately, compared to the other settlements, of the given region, So stop. This lack of balance undermines the objective of balanced regional development. Undermines the objective of balanced regional development. ठीक है. So वो जो एग्लोमरेशन हो रहा है, उस एग्लोमरेशन से what is taking place? There is this problem of inequality which is created. तो ये सेकेंड पॉइंट था हमारा एग्लोमरेशन वाला. ठीक है. उसी में नेक्स्ट पॉइंट लिखो, उसी से रिलेटेड. वी आर टॉकिंग स्टिल अबाउट द पोलराइजेशन एंड एग्लोमरेशन. तो फोर्थ पॉइंट लिखो. द प्रोसेस ऑफ पोलराइजेशन comma, where growth concentrates around a few key industries or cities, comma, is appealing in theory, but lacks robust empirical evidences. Full stop. The theory fails. या fails मत लिखो. The theory does not explain is better. Being a civil servant, you should not use such kind of extreme words. ठीक है. So the theory does not explain why some agglomerations succeed while others fail, or while others do not. Full stop. It lacks quantitative models. To predict the effects of polarization. ठीक है, अभी ये जो पॉइंट लिखा है वी विल सी सेवरल एग्जांपल्स ऑफ दैट इन द नेक्स्ट पार्ट. ठीक है, so that is another point. So we know very well, first was the concept of leading industry and propulsive form, उसका criticism हमने लिख दिया. Another was the phenomena of agglomeration and polarization, उस पे हमने criticism लिख दिए. ठीक है, एंड इससे एग्लोमरेशन से जो रीजनल इनइक्वालिटी हो रही थी उस पर भी क्रिटिसिज्म लिख दिया. नाउ व्हाट इज लेफ्ट, इट इज द ट्रिकल डाउन और द स्पिल ओवर इफेक्ट. अब उसकी बात करते हैं. सो नेक्स्ट पॉइंट, इसमें लिखो वन ऑफ द कोर क्रिटिक्स, वन ऑफ द कोर क्रिटिक्स is the theory's assumption that growth from the pole will automatically spread to the periphery. Through the forward and backward linkages. Full stop. In the real world, this trickle down mechanism often does not occur as expected. Full stop. In many cases, the economic development remains concentrated in the growth pole, comma, with limited benefits reaching the surrounding regions. Thus, the growth poles become island of development, surrounded by sea of poverty. ठीक है, सो दैट इज अनदर एस्पेक्ट ऑफ द ग्रोथ पोल थ्योरी. अगर हम देखें, फॉर एग्जांपल, गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया ने एस्टैब्लिश किया बोकारो एज अ ग्रोथ पोल. कैन आई से बोकारो हैज ग्रोन? ठीक है, इट हैज एक्सपीरियंस सम लेवल ऑफ डेवलपमेंट, बट हैज दिस डेवलपमेंट ट्रिकल डाउन टू इट्स सराउंडिंग? नो. सिमिलरली, इफ यू टॉक अबाउट भिलई, was again created as a growth pole. ठीक है, जमशेदपुर एक्चुअली पहले से था. ठीक है, so if you talk about Bhilai was created as a growth pole using this same principles of the growth pole theory. But what we again find, it has remained as an island of development and the growth has not trickled down to the surrounding region. So this is a very, very big problem of the theory. Ultimately, as a result of which, what it does, it further amplifies the regional inequalities. रीजनल इनइक्वालिटीज इससे क्या होती हैं, और ज्यादा बढ़ जाती हैं. ठीक है, देन इफ यू टॉक अबाउट, जब हमने ये 3 टिक कर लिए तो बाकी और क्रिटिसिज्म हम और लिखते हैं उसके बाद. बट मुझे लगता है कि अगर मैंने इस तरह से किया तो रिकॉलिंग दीज 5 criticism will not be a very difficult task. ठीक है. Then if you talk about 6th point, लिखो. The theory often overlooks the potential of organic growth. The potential of organic growth in peripheral areas. Organic growth in peripheral areas. Peripheral areas. Full stop. These periphery areas may have their own localized resources and advantages that can contribute to development. Full stop. By focusing exclusively on the growth pole, regional planning can miss opportunities to foster growth in these areas. ठीक है. So again, it is in a way इसी का एक extension है. Then if you talk about, there are other issues associated with the growth pole theory. Next point लिखते हैं. You understood what is the point number 6? Every place has its own unique geographical advantage, and the regional planning should try to focus upon those advantages rather than just concentrating all the growth at one place and hoping or praying that ultimately trickle down will work. ठीक है. So it is neglecting the vast amount of potential that exists. ठीक है. So suppose करो कि अभी हमने भिलाई की बात की, छत्तीसगढ़ की बात करें, तो कैन आई से कि अगर मैं सराउंडिंग एरियाज ऑफ छत्तीसगढ़ देखूं, यहां पर भिलाई के सराउंडिंग एरियाज में, तो डू वी फाइंड दैट देयर इज वेरी हाई पोटेंशियल ऑफ टूरिज्म. वहां पे हमें बहुत हाई पोटेंशियल ऑफ टूरिज्म मिलेगा, बिकॉज देयर इज ह्यूज कल्चरल डाइवर्सिटी विच विल बी फाइंडिंग. ट्राइबल्स, इफ यू टॉक अबाउट, it is tribally inhabited area, it is forested area, so nature's tourism, cultural tourism. ठीक है. तो अगर गवर्नमेंट rather than just focusing or investing everything in the growth pole, इन एरियाज में भी थोड़ा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर टूरिज्म के लिए बनाने की कोशिश करे, कैन आई से इट कैन ट्रांसलेट इनटू अ बेटर ग्रोथ फॉर द रीजन, फॉर द एंटायर रीजन. दैट इज व्हाट इज द पॉइंट नंबर 6. आगे बढ़ते हैं, 7 पे आते हैं पॉइंट. रैपिड डेवलपमेंट इन ग्रोथ पोल्स can lead to significant environmental degradation. And social displacement. So stop. Urban growth often leads to increased pollution, deforestation, and even displacement of indigenous communities, and even displacement of indigenous communities. Full stop. These are key questions. These are key questions in the contemporary paradigm of environmentalism. Contemporary paradigm of environmentalism, which have not been addressed, by the theory. ठीक है, बहुत सारे एग्जाम्पल्स हैं. टेल मी, अभी अगर इंडिया में देखें तो हैज द एक्सपेंशन ऑफ मुंबई लेड टू वेरियस एनवायरमेंटल इश्यूज? लाइक फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अभी रिसेंट कुछ पिछले साल न्यूज में था, यू माइट हैव हर्ड अबाउट द अरे फॉरेस्ट. were being cleared on the suburbs of Mumbai for expansion. ठीक है. If you talk about similar scenario was seen in as Lagos of Nigeria. The capital of Nigeria has grown. Same thing was seen. There was widespread environmental degradation. Deforestation has accompanied it. ठीक है. So all these issues remain unaddressed in the theory. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट पॉइंट पे आते हैं. तो इसमें लिखो, ग्रोथ पोल थ्योरी जनरली एडवोकेट्स फॉर अ टॉप डाउन अप्रोच. Top-down approach where governments or central authorities designate certain regions as growth poles. Certain regions as or certain places as growth poles. To stop this can result in policies that are disconnected from actual needs of the local community. Leading to inefficient resource allocation. ठीक है. इसके बहुत सारे एग्जाम्पल्स हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अगर वर्ल्ड के लेवल पर देखें, यू टेक द केस ऑफ ब्राजील. तो ब्राजील ने क्या किया? ब्राजील made its capital as Brasilia, which is located where? In the remote interiors of the country. And the basic idea was that with the creation of Brasilia, it will behave as what? As a growth pole. And this growth will be ultimately trickling down in the interior region as well. But clearly, can you understand? It hasn't taken place. Brasilia remains what? A growth pole as an island of development. Okay. And why? Because there, if you talk about indigenous local communities, tribal communities are living, and their culture is very different. Their demands, their needs are very different. ठीक है. टेक द केस ऑफ, अभी जो हमने भिलाई का एग्जाम्पल लिया, अगर वहां पर देयर इज ग्रोथ पोल क्रिएटेड, कैन यू अंडरस्टैंड कि उसकी वजह से माइनिंग बढ़ी है, डिफॉरेस्टेशन बढ़ा है, ठीक है, एंड इफ देयर इज इंक्रीज इन डिफॉरेस्टेशन, इज इट अगेंस्ट द विल ऑफ द लोकल ट्राइबल कम्युनिटीज? ठीक है, they did not needed such kind of development. What you have done, you have forced this kind of development on them. And what is the outcome of this? Outcome is very clear. There is a huge discontent. You can see that there is the Naxalism and other such type of related problems have emerged. Okay, so this is another big problem associated with the growth pole theory. Then if you talk about another problem, इसमें लिखो, there is little consensus in the literature. There is little consensus in the literature on growth pole theory. Literature on growth pole theory regarding the optimum size, regarding the optimum size of the growth poles and growth centers. Growth poles and growth centers. Full stop. The theory lacks clear guidelines. Lacks clear guidelines on how large a growth pole should be. A growth pole should be in order to sustain the propulsive growth. Full stop. The assumptions that any size, the assumption that any size can serve as growth pole, any size can serve as growth pole, is overly simplistic. Is overly simplistic. So एनी साइट मतलब एनी साइज लिखा है, ठीक है, किसी भी साइज का, कहने का मतलब है ग्रोथ पोल का साइज कुछ भी हो सकता है, ठीक है. इट डजंट वर्क्स लाइक दैट, बिकॉज अगेन कैन यू अंडरस्टैंड, इफ यू टिपिकली गो बाय द ग्रोथ पोल थ्योरी, कैन आई से कि ग्रोथ पोल थ्योरी इज डिपेंडेंट अपॉन वर्किंग ऑफ द propulsive firm and leading industry? And can I say there is a strong linkage between industry and urbanization? ठीक है, तो sustaining that industry, that in type of industrial growth, it requires a certain minimum optimum population. So growth pole theory ये clearly बताता नहीं है कि ये minimum जो optimum population चाहिए वो कितनी है, ठीक है. So again that is one of the issues with the theory. Then if you talk about another next point, इसमें देखो many growth pole strategies, many growth pole strategies are developed on this model. On this model, and it is found that they do not translate, and it is found that they do not translate well in the real world contexts. In the real world contexts. Why they will not translate into real world context? One of the problems with the theory is that the theory just takes into account economic aspects. Does the theory misses out on behavioral, cultural, political aspects? And many times these cultural aspects, political aspects, they determine the decisions rather than the economic logic. ठीक है? So suppose हम देखेंगे कि suppose if you talk about a minister is there and minister को किसी इंडस्ट्री को suppose उसके रिलेशन की इंडस्ट्री है उसको सेटअप करना है, ठीक है? Like you'll be frequently finding railway locomotive industries or the firms, they were located where? They were located in areas which were far away from the raw material places. ठीक है? So again, it doesn't make very much logical. But why they were there? Because the railway minister was from that area. ठीक है? So many times what is happening, the behavioral, cultural and political aspects dictate the decisions regarding the formulation of growth poles rather than the economic logics. And this is the reason why when it comes to the real world, we find that the theory does not translate into reality. So लिख लो इसको आगे. The growth pole concept fails to incorporate the local behavioral, cultural and political factors that influence the choice of the growth poles and thus can influence the success or failure of the strategy. ठीक है? लाइक अगर हम इंडिया में देखें तो India is experiencing a phenomena of jobless growth. What is one of the primary reasons why we are experiencing this jobless growth? सबसे मेन रीजन, अगर मुझे एक बेसिक रीजन आइडेंटिफाई करना. वेरी गुड. The most biggest problem is the structural imbalance of the Indian economy. What happened in the Indian economy? सबसे ज्यादा employment giver कौन सा सेक्टर होता है? It is the primary sector. ठीक है? इसमें सबसे ज्यादा employment generation होता है. Normally what happens as the economy graduates, what happens? ये जो primary sector से ultimately क्या होता है? There is shift towards secondary sector. So secondary sector manufacturing is the second most important in terms of the potential to provide employment. ठीक है? And least employment is provided by what? The service sector. ठीक है? इंडिया में क्या हुआ है? We have shifted from here to here directly. We haven't been able to grow this. अब ये जो ग्रोथ हो रही है, यू ऑल्सो रिमेंबर, इस ग्रोथ के साथ क्या जुड़ा हुआ है? इट इज ऑल्सो योर डेमोग्राफिक ट्रांजिशन इज ऑल्सो गोइंग थ्रू इट, सेम ग्रोथ. ठीक है? सो हियर यू आर लोकेटेड इन योर सेकेंड स्टेज ऑफ डेमोग्राफिक ट्रांजिशन, हियर यू आर लोकेटेड इन द थर्ड स्टेज ऑफ डेमोग्राफिक ट्रांजिशन. व्हेन यू हैव लॉट्स ऑफ पीपल टू वर्क. ठीक है? When you are reaching here, you are already in the fourth stage of demographic transition. When what happens? Your population begins to shrink. I hope you get my point. तो इस समय जब नॉर्मली क्या होता है, जब इकोनॉमी सर्विस सेक्टर में पहुंच रही है, when there is dominance of service sector, पॉपुलेशन का जो ट्रांजिशन हो रहा है वो कौन से स्टेज में पहुंच गया? फोर्थ स्टेज में पहुंच गया, जहां पर बर्थ रेट एंड डेथ रेट दे बोथ हैव बिकम लो. And thus there is low population growth, and thus there is no such big crisis of employment created. But India में क्या हुआ है? हम यहां पर हैं अभी और इधर पहुंच गए. So can you understand? There is that extra workforce which the service sector doesn't have the capacity to essentially provide employment. And this is the big problem which is creating this jobless growth. अब ऐसा क्यों हो रहा है? अभी आफ्टर दिस थ्योरी विल स्टडी अबाउट द रोस्टो मॉडल. तो ये जो ट्रांजिशन होता है, इस ट्रांजिशन में फॉर दिस टू टेक ऑफ, what you have to create? You have to create preconditions to take off. Industrial growth requires raw material. And who provides that raw material? Primary sector provides that raw material. ठीक है. इंडिया ने अपने प्राइमरी सेक्टर का जो डेवलपमेंट था, ठीक है, उसको फॉर ग्रांटेड ले लिया. वी डिड नॉट परस्यू इट वेरी सीरियसली. ठीक है. So first plan में you might be aware we had to postpone our industrial development because there was food crisis. It was not a policy issue. It was a food crisis which was the main issue. So government ultimately resorted to various ways like, land reforms, creation of irrigation infrastructure, बहुत सारी चीजें गवर्नमेंट करने लगी. ठीक है. And we continued to do that जब तक वो फूड क्राइसिस का प्रॉब्लम रहा. ठीक है. बट हमारे दिमाग में सबसे पहले, नेहरू के दिमाग में क्या था? इंडस्ट्रियल डेवलपमेंट. एंड दैट इम्पेशंस, इट कॉस्टेड द इंडियन इकोनॉमी. इफ वी वुड हैव फर्स्ट प्रायोरिटाइज्ड आवर एग्रीकल्चर डेवलपमेंट, if we would have prioritized our agricultural reforms to be taken seriously and completed seriously, then what would have happened? Probably we wouldn't be facing this problem which we are facing today. But we did not do so. It is very clear कि जैसे ही ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन आया और सक्सेस मिल गई, we became self sufficient in food grains, land reforms तो सब भूल गए. Nobody talked about after that the case of land reforms, which very clearly shows agricultural reforms were never a very big priority. ठीक है. So again, can you understand how behavioral factors can essentially determine these policy decisions? And they can be very, very important in determining whether the growth pole strategy which you are using will be successful or a failure. ठीक है. एग्रीकल्चरल रिफॉर्म्स भी क्यों फेल हुए इंडिया में? वन ऑफ द रीजंस वाज, कैन वी से इट इज द कल्चरल पॉलिटिकल कंटेक्स्ट. दैट वाज द रीजन. जो मेन जमींदार्स थे, दीज वर हु दे वर मोस्टली द अपर कास्ट. एंड इफ यू टॉक अबाउट, डेफिनेटली they had a huge political influence, they had a huge cultural influence. They didn't allow these reforms to be successful. So all these factors, if you talk about, they do play a very dominant role in determining the success or failure of any strategy. And clearly the growth pole theory doesn't even acknowledge existence of such factors. And that is why we can say that there is a disconnect of the theory from the real world situations. This is one of the reasons why frequently the theory fails. I hope it is clear. ठीक है. So that is next, last एक point लिख सकते हैं. इसमें लिखो आरपी मिश्रा. So it is आरपी Misra. It is not H. R.P. Misra has criticized the growth pole theory. Has criticized the growth pole theory as he believes that its applicability for a developing country like India is limited. developing country like India is limited. So stop. This is because the theory has एक this is because इसमें points में लिखो, 3 point लिखना है इसमें. This is because the theory has a strong industrial bias, which is not suitable for an agrarian economy, like India. ठीक है. Second, the theory neglects the propositions of central place theory. Particularly the principle of hierarchy. Of central places. Full stop. Thus it is not applicable to a large and diverse country, like India. Large and diverse country like India, which has presence of hierarchy of settlements or central places. So India में हमें hierarchy of settlements मिलते हैं. Does our census recognizes 10 classes of settlements? ठीक है. So growth poles अगर हम केवल टॉप पे बना देंगे तो it will lead to unequal development. Growth poles are required where? Every hierarchy पे require होने चाहिए, बनने चाहिए. And all these things are missing. उनकी theory के हिसाब से एक ही तरह का growth pole होता है. ठीक है. It is not very clear about what is the size or scale, जो अभी हमने पीछे criticism लिखा था. And why it is not very clear? Because it neglects the principle of hierarchy. ठीक है. Given by the central place theory. Third point लिखो इसमें. The theory also doesn't takes into account does not takes into account the propositions of diffusion of information theory. Full stop. In a traditional society like India, diffusion of information or innovation plays crucial role in development. So stop. Thus growth poles should also behave as what? Centers of diffusion of information. सेंटर्स ऑफ डिफ्यूजन ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन। ठीक है, और ये थ्योरी ने क्लियरली नेग्लेक्ट किया। दिस इज द रीजन। तो एज अ रिजल्ट, आगे अगर लिखना चाहते हो लिख लो, ये क्रिटिसिज्म का पार्ट नहीं है। इफ यू जस्ट वांट यू कैन क्रिएट अ बॉक्स एंड यू कैन राइट एज अ रिजल्ट ऑफ हिज डिससेटिस्फैक्शन, as a result of his dissatisfaction, R.P. Misra has presented his own alternative model of growth foci. Alternative model of growth foci, combining the propositions of growth pole theory, central place theory, and diffusion of information theory. Propositions of growth pole theory, central place theory, and diffusion of information theory. ठीक है, सो दैट इज द केस व्हाट ही हैज डन। अब इसको मटेरियल में दिया हुआ है तो इसको मैं और नहीं लिखवाऊंगा। यू कैन सी आरपी मिश्रा हैज आइडेंटिफाइड द प्रेजेंस ऑफ सेवरल सच काइंड ऑफ ग्रोथ पोल्स। तो सबसे लोअर लेवल पे अभी हमने हायरार्की में क्या देखा था, देयर इज प्रेजेंस ऑफ सेंट्रल विलेज। ये कौन सा पेज नंबर है, 12। ठीक है, सेंट्रल विलेज, और सेंट्रल विलेज जो है उसका पॉपुलेशन कितना है, 6000, एंड इट इज ऑल्सो कवरिंग पॉपुलेशन ऑफ 6 विलेजेस। ठीक है, व्हाट इज द नेचर ऑफ दिस, इट इज एसेंशियली अ रेवेन्यू विलेज और विलेज पंचायत। ठीक है, वेयर द विलेज पंचायत इज लोकेटेड। अकॉर्डिंगली यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड, यहां पर अगर ये छोटा प्लेस है, ये छोटी हायरार्की पर है, लोअर हायरार्की पर है, कैन आई से यहां पर थ्रेशोल्ड पॉपुलेशन विल बी lower. Threshold population, what is threshold population? It is the minimum population or minimum customer population required to make the any economic activity economically viable. ठीक है, so यहां पर can I say, because it is located at lower level, you cannot create industry here. ठीक है, तो यहां पर जो एक्टिविटीज होंगी वो कौन सी होंगी, दूसरे टाइप की होंगी, छोटे लेवल की एक्टिविटीज होंगी। तो कैन यू सी हियर व्हाट इज द टाइप ऑफ एक्टिविटीज व्हिच इज बीइंग डन, इट ऑफर्स मार्केटिंग, सम मार्केटिंग फैसिलिटीज कैन बी ऑफर्ड हियर, रिक्रिएशनल एंड सोशल सर्विसेज। ठीक है, यहां पर देयर विल बी प्रेजेंस ऑफ सम इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, लाइक देयर विल बी प्राइमरी स्कूल, सब पोस्ट ऑफिस, हेल्थ सब सेंटर, प्राइमरी कोऑपरेटिव्स कैन बी प्रेजेंट एट दिस लेवल। ठीक है, देन एट सेकेंड लेवल, अभी हमने ये हायरार्की बनाई थी, दिस हायरार्की। तो एट द सेकेंड लेवल इज फ्रॉम बिलो इज द सर्विस सेंटर्स। ठीक है, सर्विस सेंटर्स पॉपुलेशन इज 30,000 कवरिंग 5 सेंट्रल विलेजेस प्लस, सो 30,000 5 सेंट्रल विलेजेस को कवर कर रहा है, प्लस 5,000 इट्स ओन, उसका खुद का पॉपुलेशन। ठीक है, और ये जो लेवल है ये टाउन पंचायत का लेवल होता है। तो हेडक्वार्टर्स यहां पर क्या क्या लोकेटेड हो सकते हैं, हेडक्वार्टर्स ऑफ एक्सटेंशन ऑफिसर्स, माइनर गवर्नमेंट फंक्शनरीज, फोकल पॉइंट ऑफ सोशल इंटरकोर्स। देयर विल बी प्रेजेंस ऑफ अ ग्रोसरी स्टोर, जनरल मर्चेंट शॉप्स, माइनर रिपेयर फैसिलिटीज, टेलर, लार्जर शॉप्स, रेस्टोरेंट्स, प्राइमरी एंड मिडिल स्कूल, सब पोस्ट ऑफिस, कोऑपरेटिव बैंक, rice mills can be present here, flour mills and cinema theaters would be present here. ठीक है, then if you talk about further above is growth points. So growth points are covering a population of 1.5 lakh and serving 5 service centers which are located below, plus 10,000 to 20,000 of its own पॉपुलेशन. सो उसका खुद का पॉपुलेशन 10,000 से 25,000 है. साथ में इट इज सर्विंग 5 सर्विस सेंटर्स. सो टोटल मिलाकर के कितना पॉपुलेशन सर्व कर रहा है? अराउंड 1.5 लाख. ठीक है. तो इफ यू टॉक अबाउट, इट इज एट द लेवल ऑफ म्युनिसिपल टाउन और तालुक हेडक्वार्टर्स. सब रीजनल इनोवेटिव and propulsive urban centers contribute to the social, economic and emotional integration of the respective sub-regions, linked with the sister growth points by state highways and with service centers by district local road networks. Will contain all the facilities located in the service centers. Over and above, it will also have agro industries, dairy processing units, junior college, primary level, specialized medical facilities, etc. So such things would be found. Then there is the growth centers. Growth centers में अगर हम बात करें, coverage 10 to 12 lakh of the population. ठीक है, plus 52,000 to 5 lakh population of the growth center itself. ठीक है, there will be 500 growth centers in the country as a whole. तो अगर 500 का नंबर आता है तो कैन आई से कि इसके अराउंड सम अभी 600 के आसपास हो गया डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स, नंबर ऑफ डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स इन इंडिया. ठीक है. सो दिस विल बी द लेवल ऑफ व्हाट? डिस्ट्रिक्ट हेडक्वार्टर्स. ठीक है. एक्ट एज काउंटर मैग्नेट्स टू द लार्ज अर्बन सेंटर्स लाइक मुंबई, चेन्नई, कोलकाता एंड दिल्ली. प्रीडोमिनेंस ऑफ, यहां पर हमें क्या दिखाई पड़ता है? There is predominance of secondary sector activities. Will have collecting, storage and processing facilities for agricultural products. Will produce agricultural inputs. यहाँ पे produce होते हैं like fertilizers, pesticides, machines. It will also have a radio, television stations, banking facilities, degree colleges, university, technical institutions. ठीक है. हियर दैट ऑपरेशन ऑफ दैट एक्सटर्नल इकोनॉमीज, एक्सटर्नलिटीज जो ग्रोथ पोल थ्योरी में बात करता है, एग्लोमरेशन वाली, वो यहां पर एप्लीकेबल होता है. ठीक है. विल फंक्शन एज द इंडस्ट्रियल हब्स ऑफ द एरिया विच दे सर्व. ठीक है. देन एट द टॉप इज द लोकेशन ऑफ ग्रोथ पोल्स. ठीक है. तो ग्रोथ पोल, पॉपुलेशन ऑफ ग्रोथ पोल रेंजेस फ्रॉम 5 लाख टू 25 लाख. इट विल सर्व पॉपुलेशन of around 20 to 30 million, designed to serve as the heart of one macro region of the country. ठीक है. This will be what? State headquarters, that means state capitals. ठीक है. Will send out financial, technological research and industrial impulses to all centers and points within the area of their command. Will perform highly specialized secondary and tertiary activities. So can you understand now what was the criticism that we were talking about, that it is just focusing upon one type of economic activity, neglecting all other? So there is a hierarchy of settlements which are found. If you choose only to develop top settlements, what will happen? There will be huge imbalance in growth created. And R.P. Misra understands this. And he thus says कि rather than just developing growth pole, growth centers, we should focus on development of what? Growth foci. ठीक है. I hope it is clear. So that is the case of R.P. Misra. अलग से ये आ सकता है. ठीक है. This can also be asked separately. So be very aware of this. तो कहाँ पे पहुंचे थे हम? 11वें नंबर पे. 12वां नंबर करते हैं. Another criticism. तो इसमें लिखो ग्रोथ पोल थ्योरी. ग्रोथ पोल थ्योरी is based upon, or it falls under the, लिखो, falls under the category of exogenous knowledge exogenous knowledge theory, where it is believed that just by investing in knowledge creation, comma, innovation occurs. तो ये थ्योरी क्या कह रहा है कि जो बड़ी फर्म्स हैं वो क्या कर रही हैं, नॉलेज क्रिएशन में इन्वेस्टमेंट कर रही हैं, रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट में इन्वेस्टमेंट कर रही हैं, और उससे व्हाट इज हैपनिंग, देयर इज अल्टीमेटली टेक्नोलॉजिकल ब्रेक थ्रूज आर टेकिंग प्लेस. ठीक है, सो this type of idea is essentially referred to as exogenous knowledge theory of development. ठीक है, today we understand that there is knowledge theory of development. Knowledge plays a very important role in economic development, more so in the present world where we are living in an information age. ठीक है, so इस थ्योरी का क्या कहना है कि जो propulsive firms हैं, what they are doing, they are doing investment in what, in R&D. ठीक है, रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट में इन्वेस्ट कर रही हैं, और उससे एसेंशियली क्या हुआ, देयर इज टेक्नोलॉजिकल ब्रेक थ्रूज विच आर क्रिएटेड. ठीक है, एंड दैट इज क्रिएटिंग द स्पर्ट्स इन ग्रोथ मोमेंटम. So what is the problem? The problem is that it doesn't, if you talk about, understands how actually innovation takes place. ठीक है, how technological breakthroughs actually occur. इसका एक एग्जाम्पल देता हूं. Some time back, because you know so many students I have, and they are student in guidance IAS. But ultimately, because you become very qualified in guidance IAS, ultimately you get jobs in other coaching institutes. ठीक है, so very big, biggest coaching of UPSC. ठीक है, so they hired, and ultimately they wanted to upgrade their content and make it best. ठीक है, ultimately they hired many people who were working and upgrading the content, etc, etc. One of my students was also working there, so मैंने उससे पूछा कि अच्छा ऐसा क्या कर रहे हैं यार कि इतना they are investing so much this that. तो उसने बोला कि सर कुछ नहीं कर रहे हैं, घंटा कर रहे हैं. जो कंटेंट हेड है, ठीक है, उसने बहुत क्लियरली बता दिया है कि अगर बेस्ट कंटेंट बना दोगे तो हमारी सबकी नौकरी चली जाएगी. So what you have to make sure that the work always remains in progress. तो थोड़े थोड़े चेंजेस इधर उधर करके अल्टीमेटली दिखा दो. ठीक है, नाउ व्हाट इज द प्रॉब्लम, द हायरार्की as an organization becomes bigger, hierarchy becomes governed by people who are generalists, who are managers, who doesn't understand the technicalities which are associated with that particular work, and thus they are unable to appreciate whether there is actual progress being made or not. ठीक है, so against this there is now a knowledge theory of development, which is the endogenous knowledge theory of development. तो endogenous knowledge, अभी हम इसको लिख लेंगे. Endogenous knowledge theory of development क्या कहता है? It says that the innovation, it is not done by large firms. Innovation is actually done by individuals. Innovation is done by small proprietor firms who have that zeal to ultimately create something new. ठीक है, who are these people? These people are closely working with those large firms. ठीक है, लार्ज फर्म्स का रोल क्या है? लार्ज फर्म्स क्रिएट नॉलेज एनवायरनमेंट. ठीक है, and these individuals, because they are associated with that knowledge environment, they may be workers of that firm, ठीक है, or they may be someone who are closely related with that firm. So they have access to that knowledge. These are the people who create innovations. ठीक है, and those innovations, if you talk about, they might ultimately, suppose if they belong to the same organization, they might take up that innovation to their seniors. But who are the seniors? They are journalists. ठीक है, जब आप सीनियर लेवल पे हो और चीजें बेटर चल रही हैं, तो यू डोंट वांट टू टेक मच रिस्क्स. ठीक है, you don't want ultimately to lose the job, because if there might be a failure in trying things new. So always they will try to do what? They'll try to suppress. They'll not take those things seriously, those innovations seriously. But जिस बंदे का इनोवेशन था, उसको तो नींद नहीं आएगी. ठीक है, वो कुछ भी करेगा, वो सोचेगा कि इसको तो इम्प्लीमेंट करते ही हैं यार. ठीक है, and it is such people who actually create those innovations which cause spurts in growth. Can you understand? Like for example, take the idea, आज से अगर मैं 25 साल पहले चला जाऊं, ठीक है, no one in their dreams would have thought that a company like if you talk about Zomato and Swiggy can be there, or Amazon will become such a huge enterprise. How it happened? It was this thinking of the individuals. ठीक है, and very clearly the growth pole theory doesn't takes into account how actually innovation is done, because it represents what? A model of exogenous knowledge theory. I hope you get my point. ठीक है, so this is a big problem with the growth pole theory. इसको लिखते हैं. So exogenous knowledge theory of development. Full stop. 10. एक मिनट मुझे दिखाना कि what we have written. Just by investing in knowledge creation, innovation is done. तो स्टॉप, आगे लिखो इसमें 10. It does not clearly understands the nature of factors involved in innovation. Full stop. According to the endogenous knowledge theory of development, innovation is not done by large propulsive firms, but by individuals, and small proprietorship firms, through their startups. Full stop. Large firms are dominated by a top hierarchy of managers who are generalists. managers who are generalists. Full stop. They do not have the technical expertise to understand and appreciate the potential. Technical expertise to understand and appreciate the potentials of specific technological innovations. Specific technological innovations. Full stop. As a result, they frequently do not take risk. They frequently do not take risk of pursuing them. Do not take risk of pursuing them. Okay. So that is another problem with the growth pole theory of development. वो technological breakthroughs पे ही based है. But the problem is that it does not properly understand how these breakthroughs are taking place. Now, can you understand how much this many type of cultures which have developed, they are detrimental to the growth of India. ठीक है. अगर हम वर्ल्ड में देखें तो आज के टाइम में जो सबसे ज्यादा पेटेंट्स फाइल होते हैं, दीज पेटेंट्स आर फाइल्ड बाय चाइना, फॉलोड बाय यूएसए, यूरोप, and in all these cases you will be finding which firms are filing maximum number of patents. It is the MSMEs. ठीक है. What we have done in India, हमने अपनी पॉलिसी से MSMEs को किल कर दिया. MSME सेक्टर अभी इंडिया में इट इज ऑन द वर्ज ऑफ डाइंग. ठीक है. वी हैव इम्प्लीमेंटेड सो मच पैथेटिक पॉलिसीज. And if this continues, from where the technological innovation will be done? It will be very difficult. We'll always lag behind to countries of the developed world and even to the developing world countries like China. Okay. So this is another issue associated with the theory. So there are these 12 points which you have to remember in the growth pole theory. ठीक है. देखो सीधी सी बात है, बहुत सिंपल सी बात है कि इतना पढ़ने के बाद भी बहुत सारे लोग होंगे, ये मैं हर साल करवाता हूं, और फिर भी उसके बाद बहुत सारे लोग ढूंढते हैं ग्रोथ पोल थ्योरी, और क्या पढ़ लें. ठीक है. बहुत सारे लोग होंगे जो अभी भी ढूंढ रहे होंगे इंडस्ट्रियल रीजन्स. ठीक है. योर सक्सेस इफ यू टॉक अबाउट डिपेंड्स अपॉन कि ये क्या 12 के 12 पॉइंट याद कर सकते हो, और क्या उसको एग्जामिनेशन में वो 12 के 12 पॉइंट समरी बना करके लिख सकते हो. ठीक है. दैट इज द की. एंड अल्टीमेटली दैट इज हाउ यू शुड सी इट. ओके, आगे बढ़ते हैं. एप्लीकेशन ऑफ द ग्रोथ पोल थ्योरी. इसमें लिखो ग्रोथ पोल थ्योरी emerged as a key policy. Growth pole theory has emerged as a key policy and planning tool in the post Second World War period. In the post Second World War period, comma, primarily designed to address primarily designed to address regional imbalances. Full stop. It was applied in both the developed and developing countries. Developed and developing countries to foster economic growth in lagging regions. ठीक है. So if you talk about number of areas it has been applied, let us take some examples of that application in southern Europe. Application in southern Europe. So application in southern Europe में number of countries have tried it. One country which has tried it is Italy. Between 1950s 60s में उसने पॉलिसी बनाई और इम्प्लीमेंट किया. सो इसमें लिखो इटली was marked by a stark north-south divide. North-south economic divide लिख लो. Was marked by a stark north-south economic divide. You know, Italian north is more industrially developed and southern part, if you talk about, is less developed. तो इसमें आगे लिखो the north was more industrialized while the south what is the south? It is referred to as Mezzogiorno. While the south Mezzogiorno region remained underdeveloped. Full stop. The Italian government focused on developing industrial poles. In southern region. By introducing capital intensive industries. So what was the result? There was some success achieved where so some industrial complexes, इसमें लिखो some industrial complexes, particularly in Campania, you might be aware, it is Naples. The Campania, Puglia, particularly the Brindisi and Taranto, and in Sicily, where Gela and Syracuse became the centers. So these have done what? They have experienced growth. What was very, very clear, these were the areas which were successful growth poles. What we are trying to say. Okay. What was very clearly seen that most of these growth poles were mainly coastal locations. This means what? That the others did not meet expectations, particularly the inland, the inland areas of Mezzogiorno region. ठीक है? So that has been the case of Italy. So what has happened in Italy? Political factors influenced the selection of growth poles. Political factors influenced the selection of growth poles, leading to inefficient application of the strategy. या तो मैं सही इंग्लिश बोल नहीं पाता हूं, या तो तुम लोगों का ध्यान कहीं और है. किस चीज का लग? सुनने में. क्यों? क्योंकि ध्यान कहीं और जाता है. It happens, it can happen, I know. Particularly when there is dictation, it is very common thing that it can happen. But it should not happen यार. You people are preparing for exam, civil services की तैयारी करें, बहुत competition है, बहुत ज़्यादा competition है. तो if you are just doing for the sake of doing, ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं है. फिर मुझे भी बता दो, मैं इतनी मेहनत करके अच्छा कंटेंट ले करके क्यों दे रहा हूँ? कोई फ़ायदा ही नहीं है. नॉर्मल तरीके से अभी तक, कैन यू अंडरस्टैंड, पहले दिन ही मैंने ग्रोथ पोल खत्म कर दिया होता. टुडे वी वुड हैव, बाय दिस टाइम आई वुड हैव ऑलरेडी फिनिश्ड रोस्टो, और रीजन पे आ गया होता मैं अब तक. कल तक पूरा पेपर 1 का रीजनल प्लानिंग खत्म है, अगर मैं नॉर्मल तरीके से पढ़ाऊँ. और उसमें भी तुम लोग अप्रिशिएट करोगे मेरा पढ़ाने का तरीका ऐसा है, पता भी नहीं चलेगा तुम्हें. तो अगर मैं मेहनत कर रहा हूँ, इतने सारे नए पॉइंट्स लेकर के आ रहा हूँ, वेरी गुड पॉइंट्स, कैन यू अंडरस्टैंड, आई स्टिल स्लीप अराउंड 2-3, और घर जाने के बाद यहाँ से 7 घंटे की क्लास लेने के बाद भी जाकर के मैं पढ़ता हूँ. तो इफ आई कैन डू दैट, व्हाई यू पीपल कैन नॉट डू दैट? और वो ज़ील ही नहीं है तुम लोगों के अंदर यार. आई वॉज ऑल्सो स्टूडेंट, आई नो. आप अगर अटेंटिव हो तो फटाफट लिखोगे. एंड समटाइम्स, कैन यू अंडरस्टैंड, इट बिकम्स वेरी इरिटेटिंग. इतना फास्ट मैं डिक्टेट नहीं कर रहा हूं, बिलीव मी, यू नॉट हैव सीन फास्ट डिक्टेशन. कम इन माई 500+ क्रैश कोर्स, ठीक है, वहां पर देखोगे कि फास्ट डिक्टेशन क्या होता है. ओके, so if you talk about, that is Spain. So स्पेन का अगर हम सबसे पहले बात करें, स्पेन का कंटेक्स्ट क्या था? कंटेक्स्ट में स्पेन वॉज पॉलिटिकली आइसोलेटेड. स्पेन वॉज पॉलिटिकली आइसोलेटेड and its economic geography was fragmented. Full stop. Its transportation infrastructure was underdeveloped. Its transportation infrastructure was underdeveloped. ठीक है. So what was the growth pole strategy जो उसने यूज किया? Spain's approach was more selective. Spain's approach was more selective. Full stop. Initially, it chose 7 poles. Initially, it chose 7 poles to be developed. Seven poles to be developed, and later 5 were more added. And later 5 were more added. Full stop. The focus was on creating these poles in backward regions. In backward regions, along with expansion of transportation infrastructure. Along with expansion of transportation infrastructure. ठीक है. Then what happened in the implementation? The implementation was not very successful. So reasons इसमें लिखो, the implementation was not very successful. Challenges मैं बता रहा हूँ. The implementation was not very successful as there was limited coordination between national and regional governments. Limited coordination between national and regional governments. So again, can you see what was one reason for the failure? Political factor. आगे लिखो इसी में. The strategy also lacked. The strategy also lacked attention to critical goals. Attention to critical goals like increasing firm sizes. तो फर्म का साइज क्या होना था? ठीक है. दैट वाज आल्सो नॉट टेकन इनटू अकाउंट. ग्रोथ पोल थ्योरी के हिसाब से कौन सी फर्म्स प्रोपल्सिव फर्म्स बनती हैं? लार्ज फर्म्स become the propulsive firm. So again, these factors were neglected, and thus the growth pole strategy was not successful in Spain. So that is the first application in southern Europe हो गया. Then now let us talk about application in USA. So the strategy in USA was applied in the one important area in USA which was underdeveloped was the Appalachian region. Appalachian mountains है. Appalachian region in USA. तो इसका context क्या था? इसमें लिखो, this region was economically lagging. This region was economically lagging despite its proximity. Despite its proximity to highly industrialized areas. Like the Atlantic megalopolis लाइक द अटलांटिक मेगालोपोलिस, जिसको हमने न्यू इंग्लैंड रीजन बोला था, एंड द ग्रेट लेक्स इंडस्ट्रियल बेल्ट. And the Great Lakes Industrial Belt. So what was the growth pole strategy? यहाँ पर there was Appalachian Regional Commission. Appalachian Regional Commission. It focused concentrating public investment in selected growth centers to drive economic development. Here also what we find, there were challenges which were created. So what were the problems? यहाँ पर भी लिखो. The strategy was not very successful due to following reasons. The strategy was not very successful due to the following reasons. So what were the reasons? One, mismatch between the theoretical goals and practical implementation. Mismatch between the theoretical goals and practical implementation. Second, too many areas were designated. Too many areas were designated as growth centers. Diluting the strategy's impact. Third, political pressures led to compromises in selecting growth centers, weakening the overall strategy. In selecting growth centers, weakening the overall strategy. ठीक है. So that is basically application. ये हमने अभी तक जो एरियाज बात किए हैं, इसको हम किस में क्लासिफाई करते हैं? डेवलप्ड वर्ल्ड. Now if you talk about application in the developed countries, so developed countries में let us talk about application in Latin America. And Latin America में one country where it was implemented was Chile, again in 1960s. So if you talk about यहाँ पर क्या था strategy, इसमें लिखो growth poles were developed in 11 regions. Focusing on sectors like automobile, electronics, and iron and steel. Full stop. Some important poles included Erica for automobiles, Concepcion for steel and petrochemicals. What was the challenge? The strategy did not had much impact, as it was abandoned too soon. As it was abandoned too soon, too early. Okay. Then, besides Chile, another country which tried it was Peru in 1970s. So, what was the strategy here? इसमें लिखो, the goal was to decentralize economic power. Decentralized economic power from Lima, Callao region. From the Lima, Callao region. Lima is the capital and Callao is the port, main port. By developing Lima, Callao region, by developing secondary cities. Full stop. Here too, the strategy did not yield desired results. Here too, the strategy did not yield desired results. I am talking about the challenges. Did not yield the desired results, as industrial development was neglected and political commitments to the strategy were weak. Another place where it was tried was Venezuela. Political strategy was weak. Political will was weak. क्या लिखा हमने? पॉलिटिकल विल होगा या पॉलिटिकल कमिटमेंट? पॉलिटिकल कमिटमेंट वाज वीक. ओके. वेनेजुएला में ग्रोथ पुल स्ट्रैटेजी. तो they started a Ciudad Guana or Guyana project. Guyana project, which was a major effort to create a growth pole. It was a major effort to create a growth pole in southern part of the country. In southern part of the country. ठीक है. What they wanted to do, they wanted to create development in the entire southern region. But what happened? यहाँ पर चैलेंज क्या था? इसमें लिखो, the project suffered from enclave effect. Enclave effect, where the trickle down didn't occur and the region remained underdeveloped with some developed poles. Then another, if you talk about, the strategy was tried in Colombia. कोलंबिया। तो यहाँ पर द ग्रोथ पोल स्ट्रैटेजी क्या था, इसमें लिखो डेवलपमेंट फोकस्ड ऑन 3 मेजर सिटीज। डेवलपमेंट फोकस्ड ऑन 3 मेजर cities. One was Medellin, other was Cali, and third, if you talk about, was Barranquilla. So development focused on 3 major cities to counterbalance the dominance of the capital. What is the capital of Colombia? Bogota. To counterbalance the dominance of the capital Bogota. Barranquilla. BARRANQILLA. ठीक है, Barranquilla. Challenges में the strategy was never fully implemented. The strategy was never fully implemented due to shifting political priorities. Due to shifting political priorities. ठीक है, so these are some of the examples of application. If the question is asked on application, you can definitely use them. Otherwise also, जब हम criticism की बात कर रहे थे तो वहां पर भी you could have essentially used them. ठीक है, as an examples. So that is the case of the growth pole theory. ठीक है, growth pole theory का application इंडस्ट्रियल ज्योग्राफी में, इंडस्ट्रियल पॉलिसी में भी मैंने बताया है, देखा है सबने? किसने किसने देखा है वो वीडियो? There was a last video which was there on industrial policy. So did we talk about there also how the growth pole strategy was implemented? We talked about how the strategy has been implemented in 2 phases. First phase में it was within the, as a part of the Nehru-Manlowis model, where the core sector industries were targeted as the leading industry. ठीक है, propulsive firms की responsibility किसको दी गई थी? PSUs को. The PSUs were given the responsibility of behaving as the propulsive firms. But what was the problem? Why the strategy failed? क्यों फेल हुआ? फेल नहीं कह सकते हैं, partially successful कह सकते हैं, because it did lead to some industrialization, but it couldn't. What was the objective? We couldn't achieve those objectives. So what was the reason? Primary reason was that the PSUs could not behave as the propulsive firms. What was the role of the propulsive firms? To create technological growth, technological innovations. And PSUs were marred by problems of bureaucracy and several other type of issues, due to which they couldn't essentially do that work of technological innovation. ठीक है, and अगर technological innovations नहीं होंगे तो then what will happen? The spurts in the growth will not occur, and that is why the strategy couldn't achieve the desired success. ठीक है. Later you can understand, after 1991, now the economy is liberalized, so now the strategy is applicable in a different sense. Now if you talk about the industrial sector की अगर हम बात करें, the leading industry has changed. Now the leading industry which we are trying, it is the consumer goods industry, and उसमें pharmaceuticals and automobile are our 2 main sectors. ठीक है, जहां पर we are relying upon. And again you can understand here, the responsibility now is not only, other sectors are also there like petrochemicals or भी industries हैं. And now if you talk about the propulsive firms, not only the PSUs, there are some PSUs as propulsive firms, Maharatna, Navratna, ठीक है, many Ratnas, who are given the responsibility to behave as the propulsive firms. But there are also now the private sector propulsive firms. ठीक है, Tata, for example, is what? It is a propulsive firm. If you talk about Reliance, is what? It is seen as a propulsive firm. So these propulsive firms are to cause that spurts in growth. In a way, you can understand Tata has done that. Tata purchased technology from the world. And essentially what has happened as a result, the technology is now part of India. ठीक है, तो अगेन वो अगर लिखना होगा एप्लीकेशन के बारे में तो वो इंडिया वाला डिटेल्ड केस स्टडी जो हमने वहां पे पढ़ा है, दैट ऑल्सो यू कैन डेफिनेटली राइट अबाउट. आई होप इट इज क्लियर नाउ. दैट इज द ग्रोथ पोल थ्योरी. नाउ आई एम वेरी श्योर कि इतना पढ़ने के बाद ग्रोथ पोल थ्योरी का एक भी ऐसा क्वेश्चन नहीं होगा जो इसके बाहर आएगा जो हमने पढ़ा है. ठीक है, बट मैं उससे भी ज्यादा श्योर हूं कि 99.9% ऑफ द पीपल, ठीक है, जब एग्जाम में वो क्वेश्चन आ जाएगा ग्रोथ पोल थ्योरी का, ठीक है, तो पता लगेगा कि पूछूंगा कि डिड यू अटेम्प्ट दिस क्वेश्चन, तो नहीं. क्यों? क्योंकि सारा याद नहीं था. कौन सा क्वेश्चन अटेम्प्ट किया? चांद पे घर कैसे बनाए. ऐसे क्वेश्चंस आते हैं सब्जेक्टिव. ठीक है, तो जो बहुत सब्जेक्टिव है जिसपे एक बच्चा भी लिख सकता है, ठीक है, ये सारे क्या करते हैं, वो वाले क्वेश्चन चूज करते हैं क्योंकि इन्होंने रट्टा नहीं मारा. ठीक है, जो स्पेसिफिक क्वेश्चन है उसमें अच्छा परफॉर्म करने के लिए आपको रट्टा मारना पड़ता है. Subjective questions, so many subjective questions can be there. For example, how environmental degradation is taking place, this, that, population is the sole cause of environmental problems. ठीक है, जीएस का एक स्टूडेंट भी लिख देगा और बहुत अच्छा लिख देगा. ठीक है, but again the problem will be these specific questions which are most marks fetching, people will not attempt because they will lack that memorization. और सारी की सारी मेहनत पानी में गई. ठीक है, so beware, this is what is happening in the field of UPSC. आगे बढ़ते हैं. So next, if you talk about, is the Rostow model of economic growth. Rostow model of economic growth. So again, it is a model and theory which is given in our syllabus. So Rostow model of economic growth is very very easy. और इसको सिंपल सा समझना है. इसका मैं कंटेक्स्ट बताता हूं. Do you remember that we had talked about the historical materialism theory of Marx? ठीक है, हिस्टोरिकल मेटेरियलिज्म थ्योरी ऑफ मार्क्स क्या कहता है? इट इज बेस्ड अपॉन हाउ द हिस्ट्री हैज बीन देयर इन यूरोप. तो रिमेंबर हमने क्या देखा था कि देयर वाज प्रिमिटिव कम्युनिज्म व्हिच वाज प्रेजेंट एंड देन केम व्हाट? फ्यूडलिज्म. फ्यूडलिज्म के बाद फ्यूडल लैंडलॉर्ड्स बन गए, एग्रीकल्चर लेबरर्स बन गए. तो देयर वाज क्रिएशन ऑफ रिच एंड पुअर. Ultimately, these rich people later became the capitalists and there was evolution of capitalism. And thus what has happened? This gap has kept on increasing. Marx believed that future mein what will be taking place is there will be a violent revolution which will overthrow capitalism. And this violent revolution will ultimately lead to development of modern communism. ठीक है, so this was the theory, a very comprehensive theory which was developed by Marx on European history. ठीक है, now what happened? This theory was present and it was a tool for the communist nations, and you know one of the communist nation was Russia. ठीक है, so can you understand, there as the Cold War rivalry started, ठीक है, the Western camp, it lacked any such historical theory to explain how the growth will be taking place if the countries adopt their camp, if they become their allies. Because you know, उस समय there were number of developing countries which had become independent. ठीक है, after the Second World War, so many countries, developing countries, they had become independent. Before they were colonies. So there were two camps, the Soviet Union camp and the US camp, the NATO camp, which was there. Both of them wanted allies, countries who should adopt their model of development. ठीक है, NATO camp के लिए बहुत जरूरी है, because they were, you can understand, US pressed very, very strongly to make sure that these countries became independent. One of the reasons was that till the countries were colonized by the European countries, US could not have colonized those countries. इसलिए बहुत जरूरी क्या था कि ये countries independent हो जाएं, so that US can recolonize them. And US adopted a strategy to recolonize them, and this strategy was extension of capitalism. You can see that what has happened. We are, in a way, it is neo-colonization. So ultimately, they wanted to do what? They wanted to attract these countries towards themselves, towards their camp. अब जो सोवियत यूनियन था, उसके पास तो एक कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव थ्योरी थी मार्क्स की, बट ये जो वेस्ट कैंप था, इसके पास कोई ऐसी थ्योरी नहीं थी. और इस कंटेक्स्ट में who came forward? It was Rostow. He created a theory of model of economic growth stages. Okay, so how these economic growth stages are taking place, and he talks about that ultimately, first there is a traditional society. This traditional society creates conditions of preconditions for takeoff. Then there is takeoff. Then there is drive to maturity, and then ultimately reaches the age of high mass consumption, where you can say, it was said that the developed world countries, they are located where? At the age of high mass consumption. ठीक है? So it was a kind of lure which was tried. So developing countries को भी बोला गया कि अगर आप भी ऐसा ही करोगे, so what will happen? History will repeat itself, and over a period of time, what will happen? You will also reach to this age of high mass consumption, and you will also become highly developed. It has stopped working. Okay. So essentially, you can understand that it was a kind of lure, so that if you talk about the developing countries come to their camp, they become their supporters. In the process, they will be able to extend their market-based mechanism and would be able to neo-colonize these countries. और इस context में ये theory को develop किया गया. I hope you can understand now. Although he is talking about very logical things which have actually happened in the case of Europe and the other developed countries of the world. Okay. So in this context, the model should be seen. So you can see here, there is introduction. Okay, इसमें कुछ ज़्यादा नहीं है. There is introduction. Then the main model, where the main thing is the stages that you have to discuss. Okay. So the process of economic development is function of what? Complex socio-economic and political factors operating within a physical environment characterized by diversity and distribution of resources. Various attempts have been made to understand such complex process through formulation of spatial and non-spatial models of economic development. Growth pole theory represented which type of model? Spatial model of economic development. Okay. However, few have gained currency. That means few have become famous. One classic example of non-spatial model. So this model is which type? It is a non-spatial model of economic development, was one formulated by W. Rostow in 1955. Can you understand? This was the time when Cold War was about to reach its peak. Okay. So at that time, the theory was formulated, also known as the Rostow's model of stages of economic growth. Okay. So it is very, very clearly what it is, a non-spatial model of development. It is not concerned about space. ठीक है. और अगर इसमें कुछ ऐड करना है तो यू कैन ऑल्सो राइट दैट ही यूज्ड विच मेथड ऑफ थ्योरी फॉर्मुलेशन. हिज थ्योरी इज इंडक्टिव थ्योरी. His theory is inductive theory. ठीक है. Then if you talk about that means he has based his theory on the experience of developed countries, first world countries के experience पर ये theory based है. And we will be finding it has very much parallels with the demographic transition theory. Like the demographic transition theory is an inductive theory based upon the experience of the first world, but it looks into what from demographic perspective. Here this theory looks the same phenomena from a more economic perspective, how the growth has progressed. ठीक है. So Rostow identifies 5 stages of economic development with takeoff into self-sustaining growth. Economy develops rapidly and encourages growth of other sectors. Though essentially non-spatial in nature, the model is applicable at regional and national scale. अभी देखेंगे कि कैसे applicable है. The stages of development present an attempt to generalize the sweep of modern history and imply that the developed history of West will be repeated also where? In the underdeveloped world or underdeveloped or developing countries. Rostow model of stages of economic growth, subtitled as, can you see the name? A non-communist manifesto, was designed as a rebut of Communist Manifesto of 1848, which had been written by Marx and Engels. So it was a deliberate opposition to the historical materialist analysis of Marx. ये Max नहीं है, Marx है, print typing error है. To comprehend the societal changes. ठीक है. Thus Rostow advocated a historical approach to the process of economic development through which all nations may pass sooner or later. ठीक है. So if we talk about, there are 5 stages. तो सबसे पहली जो स्टेज है वो कौन सी स्टेज होती है? इट इज अ ट्रेडिशनल सोसाइटी स्टेज. देन देयर इज प्री कंडीशंस टू टेक ऑफ. देन देयर इज फाइनली द टेक ऑफ टेकिंग प्लेस. टेक ऑफ इज व्हेन द कंट्रीज इंडस्ट्रियल सेक्टर बिगिंस टू ग्रो एट फास्टर रेट. दैट इज टेक ऑफ. ठीक है. तो प्लेन की तरह होता है. इट इज मोर लाइक अ प्लेन. सो वंस अ प्लेन हैज टेकन ऑफ, ultimately what will happen? According to Rostow, the growth becomes self-sustaining now. Okay, once the takeoff has taken place, it becomes self-sustaining. So economy passes to drive to maturity and ultimately reaches to the age of high mass consumption. ठीक है. तो अगर एग्जाम में बना रहे होगे तो एक तो तरीका ये है जहां पर इस तरीके का डायग्राम बनाया गया. ठीक है. Another is you can also try like oh sorry. drive towards maturity, and finally the age of high mass consumption. ठीक है. सो ये जो मैंने अभी डायग्राम बनाया है, जब मैंने अपने नोट्स बनाए थे तो बहुत खूबसूरत से नोट्स बनाए थे. एंड उसमें वो नोट्स में केवल यही नहीं था, उसमें पिक्टोरिकल प्रेजेंटेशन भी थी कि देयर इज हाउ अ फ्लाइट इज स्टार्टिंग एंड हाउ इफ यू टॉक अबाउट इट इज टेकिंग अ रन ऑफ एंड अल्टीमेटली फाइनली हाउ इट टेक्स ऑफ. ठीक है, तो इस तरह से करके मैंने उसमें बनाया. बट व्हेन इट कम्स टू द रियल वर्ल्ड एग्जामिनेशन ये सब कुछ काम नहीं करता. मेरे टाइम में स्टिल इफ यू टॉक अबाउट यू डिड नॉट हैड लिमिटेशन ऑफ स्पेस. ठीक है, नाउ यू ऑल्सो हैव लिमिटेशन ऑफ स्पेस. इन आवर पीरियड, इन आवर टाइम पीरियड वी हैड मोर लिमिटेशन ऑफ टाइम रादर देन स्पेस. हम कितनी भी कॉपी लेकर के भर सकते थे, बट नाउ यू हैव लिमिटेड स्पेसेस. ठीक है, तो ये डायग्राम कई जगह पर दिखाई पड़ेगा, बट अगर मैं ये वाला डायग्राम ट्राई करता हूं, व्हाई आई हैव मेड इट हियर, कैन आई से आई एम लूजिंग लॉट्स ऑफ स्पेस इन द कॉपी. आई होप यू गेट माई पॉइंट. ठीक है, तो रैदर देन इस तरह से अगर सीधा बनाए तो दैट विल ऑल्सो वर्क, और हॉरिजॉन्टली ऑल्सो इट विल वर्क, इट डजेंट मैटर. ठीक है, so that is these stages. So अब स्टेजेस की बात करें, सबसे पहली स्टेज कौन सी स्टेज होती है? इट इज द ट्रेडिशनल सोसाइटी स्टेज. ट्रांसपोर्ट में प्रांजल सर ने यूज किया होगा रोस्टो मॉडल को. ठीक है, तो इफ यू टॉक अबाउट द ट्रेडिशनल सोसाइटी स्टेज, इट इज कैरेक्टराइज्ड बाय प्रिमिटिव टेक्नोलॉजी based on pre-Newtonian science. ठीक है, a hierarchical structure that is largely static and the behavior conditions by more by customs and accepted practices than by rational choice. ठीक है, so this is the characteristic of a traditional society. ठीक है, which is more religious, which is more, if you talk about, based upon such kind of customs. Economic structure is predominated by agricultural activity with low per capita productivity, and agriculture is of which type? It is subsistence type. And why it is subsistence type? This is either due to lack of technological know-how or due to refusal to acceptance of new ideas and innovations. ठीक है, so primarily the economy is agrarian subsistence type economy. ठीक है, तो अगर हम इस तरह की कंट्रीज की बात करें तो आज के डेट में ऐसी कंट्री फाइंड करना विच इज स्टिल इन द ट्रेडिशनल सोसाइटी स्टेज एट अ फुल कंट्री लेवल, इट इज वेरी डिफिकल्ट. देयर इज नो सच कंट्री बिकॉज द डिफ्यूजन ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन हैज टेकन प्लेस टू ऑल ऑफ द वर्ल्ड नाउ. ठीक है, यू कैन फाइंड इंडिविजुअल सोसाइटीज विच माइट स्टिल बी लोकेटेड, some sub-regions within a country, part of those regions can still be located in this stage. So ये areas हमें कहाँ पर मिलते हैं? Africa is one of the areas. Tribal societies, for example, if you talk about, they can be called as the primitive tribal groups, particularly to be located in this traditional society stage. I hope it is clear. So इस समय there is no such productive investment taking place. The economy is basically subsistence type. Then comes the preconditions to take off. So the second stage, इसमें क्या हो रहा है? It involves process of transition from traditional society to the take off. So ये क्या है? That means preconditions to take off is a transitional stage. is a transitional stage. So here the stimulus of this change is provided by exogenous influences like insights of modern science that is translated into the economy and social values. Okay. In this stage, economic growth is accepted as a necessary condition for both general welfare and the preconditions to take off. Consequently, there is rise of productive investment. ठीक है, ये प्रोडक्टिव इन्वेस्टमेंट कौन से सेक्टर में ग्रो करेगा? इट विल बी इन द प्राइमरी सेक्टर. ठीक है, तो मच ऑफ दिस प्रोडक्टिव इन्वेस्टमेंट विल बी टेकिंग प्लेस इन द प्राइमरी सेक्टर. सो प्रोविजन ऑफ installation of social and economic infrastructure, emergence of new economically based elite, and based on effective centralized nation states. So at this point there will be emergence of those nation states also taking place. Remember, again I am saying this productive investment is where? In the primary sector. दैट मीन्स इस स्टेज में माइनिंग का डेवलपमेंट होता है, इस स्टेज में एग्रीकल्चरल रिफॉर्म्स किए जाते हैं. ठीक है, सो दैट व्हाट इज टेकिंग प्लेस व्हेन यू आर डूइंग एग्रीकल्चरल रिफॉर्म्स, कैन आई से थ्रू दैट योर सबसिस्टेंस एग्रीकल्चर कैन बी ट्रांसफॉर्म टू विच टाइप ऑफ एग्रीकल्चर? Commercial agriculture. Because it is the commercial agriculture which will be able to generate surplus production. That surplus production will provide raw material for the development of the industries. Okay. So agriculture and extractive industry play a key role in this stage that is given dynamism by laterally expanding world markets and international competition. Some of the countries, if you talk about, which can be called और सेट टू बी लोकेटेड हियर, ये कौन सी कंट्रीज इसमें लोकेटेड है अभी भी स्टेज में? जिन कंट्रीज को हम बोलते हैं अंडर डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज. ठीक है, अंडर डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज आर सेट टू बी लोकेटेड इन दिस स्टेज. और ये अंडर डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज प्राइमरली हमें कहां पर मिलती हैं? सब साहारन अफ्रीका. ठीक है, सम ऑफ द कंट्रीज ऑफ साउथ ईस्ट एशिया. ठीक है, सम कंट्रीज ऑफ साउथ एशिया लाइक अफगानिस्तान, इफ यू टॉक अबाउट, दे कैन बी सेट टू बी लोकेटेड इन दिस स्टेज. ठीक है, देन कम्स द थर्ड स्टेज, एंड द थर्ड स्टेज इज द स्टेज ऑफ टेक ऑफ. So ultimately what happens once the base for industrialization has been created? Preconditions to take off क्या कर रहा है? Industrialization के लिए base तैयार कर रहा है. So in the next stage what happens? There is industrialization taking place. And this is referred to as the take-off stage. ठीक है, so the third stage of take-off, यहां पर क्या होता है? Sustained growth now begins to take place. Once industrialization is done, now there is no more efforts to be made. The growth will now be sustained for long periods of time. ठीक है, is relatively short period of 2 to 3 decades. It is a high watermark characterized by radical changes in the methods of production and exponential growth in the economy. Their rise in investments and savings, rapid growth and technological advances in industry involving the primary and manufacturing sectors. This is further stimulated by change in social outlook that has evolved due to enhanced incomes, savings and demand supply mechanisms. ठीक है, this stage has been described by Rostow as a great watershed in the life of modern societies. Hereby the economic, social and political structure of the society is transformed in such a way that a steady rate of growth is regularly sustained. As I told you, now once the growth, we have achieved this stage, the growth will remain sustained. ठीक है, because everything in the society has changed. This leads to industrial revolution. ठीक है, so here the industrial revolution in the country occurs, and it is simultaneously accompanied by enhanced urbanization. Human development indicators will also slowly rise. ठीक है. ब्रिटेन की बात करें, फॉर एग्जाम्पल, एंटर्ड दिस स्टेज इन लेट 18th century. France during 1830s to 60s, US in 1840s to 60s. Both India and China entered this stage in 1970 and 80 and are now in line to drive towards maturity. Also UAE. So this is the stage 3. यहाँ पर एक और चार्ट दिया है मैंने जिसमें वो सारी कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स को ब्रेक किया है. इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ कैसे हो रहा है, सोसाइटी की क्या कंडीशंस हैं, पॉलिटी, टेक्निकल इनोवेशन, इंडस्ट्री, विच टाइप ऑफ इंडस्ट्री इज प्रेफर्ड, एंड व्हाट इज द केस ऑफ इन्वेस्टमेंट विच इज टेकिंग प्लेस. ठीक है. देन इफ यू टॉक अबाउट नेक्स्ट स्टेज कम्स इज द ड्राइव टुवर्ड्स मैच्योरिटी. ठीक है. तो ड्राइव टुवर्ड्स मैच्योरिटी में और चेंजेस हो रहे हैं, एंड इफ यू टॉक अबाउट नाउ द सेल्फ सस्टेन्ड ग्रोथ इज टेकिंग प्लेस. ठीक है. This stage is characterized by diversification of industries and agricultural practices. Take off में जो industries develop की गई थी, they were more which type of industries? Basic good industries. ठीक है. Here industrialization process diversifies and now it also enters into consumer goods industries. ठीक है. Surplus in international trade is achieved by the country. ठीक है, because now it will also become important exporter of manufacturing products. ठीक है. Steep rise in productive investment will also take place in the industries. All these changes are attributed to efficient application of range of technologies available to the bulk of resource endowments. It represents a long duration, ये period जो है, which extends over 4 to 5 decades. There is an increased emphasis on common goods and services, and the nation state is closely analogous to a welfare state in all respects. The net rate of productive investment exceeds well over 10 to 20%, and the economy's foundation is strong enough to withstand shocks of global fluctuations and crisis. ठीक है. ब्रिटेन की बात करें तो इट एंटर्ड इन द स्टेज इन 1850s, यूएस इन 1900, रशिया इन 1950, इंडिया, चाइना, साउथ कोरिया हैव रिसेंटली एंटर्ड दिस स्टेज. ठीक है. So that is the drive towards maturity. Then comes the last stage, that is the age of high mass consumption. So the last stage is characterized by a state of attainment of comfort, luxury and welfare to all inhabitants. The leading sectors shift from production of heavy industries to durable consumer goods and services. So now they have become the leading sectors. There is also a shift in emphasis from production to consumption and welfare. Okay. Only few countries, if you talk about, have entered this stage. Mostly, which countries have entered this stage? First world countries. Okay, have entered this stage. So this is the simplest, it's a very simple model of Rostow. As I told you, इस चार्ट में और डिटेल्स दिए हुए हैं ज़्यादा अच्छे से. तो पढ़ने के लिए, रिवाइज करने के लिए बेस्ट क्या है? This chart is the best. So you can see in traditional society, economic growth is not counted because it is essentially traditional society. Society की characteristics क्या हैं? Traditional community values are being followed. Polity, small hierarchical governing elites, they are managing everything. Technology is very limited. Industry, if you talk about, mainly agriculture, which type of farming? Subsistence farming. Investment, if you talk about, hardly investment, it is, you know, people are investing in agriculture, whatever their local resources they have. Okay. Then comes the preconditions to take off. Economic growth, if you talk about, it is low. Okay. Focus is on export of agricultural products. Okay. Society, if you talk about, it has become now aspirational citizenry is there, eager to follow success of the neighboring countries or the known countries. ठीक है. इंडिया में भी अगर हम देखें तो, फॉर एग्जाम्पल, we reached this stage, preconditions to take off. Can I say we wanted to follow the model of the developed world? ठीक है. So polity, if you talk about, increasing elite legitimacy problems, एमर्ज होने लगते हैं। टेक्नोलॉजिकल इनोवेशंस, इंक्रीजिंग कमर्शियलाइजेशन, लो लेवल ऑफ एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप इज फाउंड, इंडस्ट्री, एनहांस्ड एग्रीकल्चरल प्रोडक्टिविटी, ठीक है, यानी कि एग्रीकल्चर कैसा होने लगा, कॉमर्शियल एग्रीकल्चर, ठीक है। स्टार्ट ऑफ लो लेवल मैन्युफैक्चरिंग, यहां से स्टार्ट होती है, माइनिंग इज वन इंडस्ट्री विच स्टार्ट्स, ठीक है। एंड सरप्लस, अगेन यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड, इन्वेस्टमेंट इज देयर, प्रोडक्टिव इन्वेस्टमेंट इज टेकिंग प्लेस इन विच सेक्टर, इन द प्राइमरी सेक्टर, ठीक है। तो इसी तरह से टेक ऑफ है, इसी तरह से मेच्योरिटी है, मास कंजम्पशन। तो अगर मैं केवल ये चार्ट भी याद कर लूंगा, ठीक है, इट इज ऑल्सो अ वेरी गुड वे ऑफ प्रेजेंटिंग इन द एग्जामिनेशन, ठीक है। अगर मैं ऐसे पैराग्राफ्स लिखता हूं, दिस इज वन वे, एंड इफ आई मेक दिस चार्ट, कैन आई से विच वन इज मोर visible to the examiner? The chart is the more visible to the examiner, ठीक है। So this is the best way to present it, ठीक है। So this is the Rostow model. Tomorrow we'll talk about the criticism and its application, ठीक है। So goodbye for today, कल मिलते हैं।